Podcast 411, Item 233. Today's guest is Aaron Mahnke, host of the Lore Podcast.
Podcast411.com. Listen different.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Rob, and this is the Podcast 411 podcast. In this episode, we have an interview with Aaron Mahnke. After the interview, I will get you some additional podcast news and where I will be going, and so please stick around after the interview to find out those details. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated. Give us a call, 206-666-4357. That's 206-MOM-HELP, or send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. And now, on to the interview with Aaron. Here we go. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Traditional question I always start with is, what was your first computer?
You know, I cheated and asked you that up front so that I could dig into it. And I have memories of a computer that my dad brought home when I was probably, 11 or 12. And I've dug around, and the best that I can come up with was the Compaq Portable 2. So it looked kind of like a suitcase that was laying down, and then the front panel would pop off
out, yep.
and lay down, and it was a keyboard. And then there was this square, black with the green text monitor and a couple of 5 1/4 drives, floppy drives. I'm guessing it was a Compaq Portable. There are others of the same type of design, but man, I'm over 40, so it's been a long time.
Yeah, for those that don't know, it's almost like if you have like one of those file folder plastic containers, with file folders in them, and that have that a taller cover. It looks almost like that design.
Yeah, it was a really weird computer. I mean, it worked because it kept the text small, but yeah, they were weird. So
it was
that
quote unquote portable, but I think it weighed like 50 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the first podcast you listened to?
Again, dating me here. I'm not sure I remember completely. So I know that it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. I worked for about a decade as a graphic designer, and I listened to Mike Montiero's show, Let's Make Mistakes. And this was like way back in the early days of that. It was Mike Montiero, a host, and people wrote in with questions. He did 2 questions per show. And as a designer, it was great. It was a place where I could learn and listen to somebody else who's hit problems that I've hit before and hear how they solve them. So it was pretty good.
Are there any podcasts you're listening to on a regular basis now?
Not nearly enough, because there's so many good shows out there. But I spend so much time writing, which means that I listen to instrumental music, or I'm recording and editing, which means I can't listen to anybody else's show. But I do listen to 99% Invisible. Hello from the Magic Tavern is a new one on my rotation. And I listen to a show called Still Untitled with Adam Savage from the folks over at tested.com. And I always tell people to go listen to The Allusionist by Helen Zaltzman. It's just one of my favorites.
You're the first person I've interviewed that started after what I call the third inflection point of podcasting. So the first was when iTunes launched. The second was when the iPhone came out. And the third is iOS 8, when Apple's podcast app became native. Right. So those are like the 3 inflection points. Now, people confuse that third one thinking it was Serial. No, it really wasn't, but that's a different debate for a different day.
Yeah.
So I mean, what was it that made you want to do lore to get started?
Well, you talk about those 3 inflection points, and it's interesting because I actually started a podcast about 4.5 years ago. The buddy of mine, his name is Dave Gale. He wrote for AOL for their tech stuff on the Mac side of things, kind of like a sub-site called the Unofficial Apple Weblog. And he worked from home writing for, the corporation. I worked from home as a graphic designer. So about 4.5 years ago, we started a podcast called Homework about working from home, very creatively titled and creatively themed. And for 4 years, we kind of tackled, all the ins and outs of what's it like to work from home, what happens when people show up to clean your floors or sand and buff while you're about to do something, or how do you find space to work, all that kind of stuff. We did that. And then towards the beginning of this year, when lore had it was all consuming at that point, I had to step out of that podcast. But I want to say that he and I started that podcast kind of like after that second inflection point, maybe a few years later. I remember seeing podcasting dip a little bit while we were doing it. And then you're right, there was that other iOS 8 moment, podcast app appears on everybody's iPhone, and all of a sudden it really took off.
You're one of the many then that had their second podcast be their really popular one.
Yeah, absolutely. But I tell people that lore was an accident. I mean, I didn't set out to try to make this. I'd been writing novels and self-publishing them with very little success, because if you want to be successful with that, you have to have an audience, and I didn't have an audience. So what I thought I could do is grow my email list, get it big enough to where if I emailed out to the list and said, hey, I've got a new book, they'll run out and buy it, and then that would support me. And that was a really dumb idea, but I didn't realize that soon enough. So I started creating this giveaway. I was writing fiction, but I kept bumping into all these really great historical stories that they were creepy and they were cool and they had so much life to them. And so I decided to write this thing called my 5 favorite New England myths. And I would write 5 of these little historical essays, nonfiction, just write about this myth and all the background and all the history and all that. I would put it in a PDF and I'd give it to people if they sign up for the email list. Seemed pretty easy. But when I hit the 20,000 word mark in this thing, and I wasn't even on the 5th story yet, I thought, this is too long for me personally to want to read. So I'm just going to throw it away and move on and not write anymore, because I had to justify the time I was spending on writing that I was taking away from design work, and it just wasn't working out. I thought, I'm just going to trash this. And then a few days later, I had this idea, maybe audio would be a better format. I had a mic. I listened to audiobooks. Maybe I could record the 4 that I had kind of audiobook style and give those away to my email subscribers. So I recorded a test run on the first historical essay, and I sent it to a friend for feedback. And he said, don't release this, as a free giveaway. Put it out as a podcast, which wasn't what I expected, but I listened to him. And after that, things kind of moved fast. I branded the show, built the website, got the hosting, all of that, figured out iTunes, all within about 24 hours. And then I launched it. And untouched from how I had sent it to my friend. And that was lore. That basically became lore.
And for the few that haven't listened, what are the topics? Tell them a little bit more about what they're going to hear when they listen to lore.
Well, so lore is a storytelling podcast that covers dark historical events, people, folk tales, sometimes when superstition bleeds into real life and causes people to do unusual things. It's just me talking over a bed of music. If that sounds really dumb, it's a little bit more exciting than that. I tell people it's kind of like a modern campfire storytelling experience. Let's sit down. Let me tell you a little bit about this thing that happened. And
there are some really dark stories that you've covered. I've been bulk listening. I've listened now to all, but I think about 8 of your episodes. And I'm working through those, so I'll get the last 8 out here in this week. There was a point where one day I listened to like 7, and I felt really melancholy at the end of the day. I was like, okay, I think I overdosed it there a little bit.
Yeah, that can happen.
I'll tell you the story that literally haunts me because I actually dreamt about it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I'll say it, and then I'll ask you which one haunts you. But the one that haunts me is one of the early ones, which was, it almost starts out the story sounding like something out of Wile E. Coyote, where they were digging the tunnel, and then there was an explosion at the top, and then the guys are at the bottom of the tunnel, they're digging, and all of a sudden stuff starts falling down at them, and you start explaining that they're like knives and all this stuff that's falling at them, and then the building is falling at them, and then it starts to flood, and then it's all said and done, and I'll let people listen. It's episode, I think, 2. But at the end, these guys, they come back and they find them later on, and I was like, oh, and it just, the thought of that, and what those guys had to go through, really creeped me out. Is there a story that you've done that you keep thinking back to, like, oh man, I gotta get that out of my head?
Not a particular story as far as like a narrative or a plot that I keep coming back to, but the element, anytime somebody's buried alive, and it's popped up a couple of times in episodes, people who are mistakenly buried, their loved ones thought they were dead and they weren't. They were just really, really sick.
The one you talked about with the fingernails, they opened up the coffin because the sister or something, and they opened it up and her fingernails were all broken off. I was like, oh.
Yeah, scratch marks on the lid of the coffin. It's just, if I close my eyes and I try to picture that experience, I feel levels of panic that I never thought were humanly possible. It's really freaky. And everybody has their own, that if you're drowning, if you're small spaces or whatever, buried alive, loss of control like that, that's just crazy.
Let the listeners know, when did you put up the first episode of Lore?
So episode 1 went live, in my mind, it's March 18th of last year. So March 18th of 2015. So the show's about almost a year and a half old.
I have the advantage. I get to see your stats. And I went into your stats. And I was looking at your stats for the first month and a half, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden, on April 27th, your show went from, let's say, less than mediocre to, oh my God, what happened?
It went from what, about 200 a day,
If
if the 150 or so, to something like 3,500, didn't it?
yeah, and it just like took off, and then from that point on, it just kept going.
It's yeah. We were on vacation. As a designer working for myself from home, we had the luxury of going down to see my in-laws in Atlanta. We would go for 3 weeks, and I would just camp out and work there while the family did fun stuff. And I remember sitting on their couch one night. We were watching Faulty Towers, which is just it's a great early John Cleese series. Yeah, and it's a family favorite. So we always throw that on if we get together. We were watching Faulty Towers, and I can be a little stats obsessive. I had a lot of fun watching it climb from 0 to 150 every day, thinking, wow, that's 150 people who just listened to an episode. And I looked that night, and it said something like 800. And I thought, no, that's odd. They must have done something over at Libsyn. You know, the server must have gotten some coffee spilled on it or something. And then I checked after the show was over, and it was, 1,000. And okay, now we're getting into 10 times the normal downloads territory. And I had no frame of reference. I didn't know what to do to figure out what was going on. And then out of the blue, I just decided, why don't I check iTunes and see what's going on? And sure enough, I was listed right there in the new and noteworthy. And
On the front page.
On the front page. And that was what was pushing the download. So I went from, it's like 150 the day before to something.
Nothing you did, just someone at iTunes discovered your show, liked your artwork, liked your content, and said, hey, let's feature this.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I do appreciate. I like that there's a human touch there. That it's not all algorithms and, what's getting the most clicks or whatever. It's people listening to podcasts and saying, this is pretty cool. I bet some people would like this. And then they throw in a new noteworthy. It's a pretty neat thing.
And your audio quality from day one was really good. So
oh my gosh. Well, I joke about that because I recorded the audiobook version of these 5 tales. I recorded the first one and I listened to it. I'm in an old New England home with horsehair plaster and angular walls, a hardwood floor, hard IKEA furniture. There's no soft surface in my office. And I recorded this with the Blue Yeti, which isn't a bad mic, sitting on a cardboard box in front of my keyboard, right between me and a glass monitor. So if there was a way to break any more acoustic rules, I don't know that I could have found it. Like it was horrible. It's like when you take a really bad picture and then you throw it on Instagram and you put a couple filters and blur something and all of a sudden it looks really good. That's what the music did for me. When I put the bed of music underneath my voice, it really got rid of a lot of the echo. And that's why it was there. Like I tell people, this was all.
It was to solve a problem.
It was to solve a problem. This was all an accident. I'm really sorry.
Where do you get most of your music from? I know sometimes you've mentioned SoundCloud, and where do you get music from nowadays?
I've got a friend named Chad Lawson, and he is, I think just a couple of years ago, he was the #1 classical pianist on iTunes. He's released a couple of albums centered around different composers. He just put out some Bach chorales. Just brilliant. His touch is so great. So he brings a lot of the mood to that. So we'll communicate a lot, and I'll tell him, length of time and the mood that I'm aiming for, and he gives me some great stuff to dig through. So you'll hear a lot of Chad Lawson on my show, just because he and I click really well as far as like we get the same mood. And some people hammer away at the keys, and some people are a little bit more artistic with it. And he's really good at what he does.
Do you want to pimp where people can go find his music?
I believe his website is chadlawson.com. I can confirm that.
And we'll have a link in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's fantastic. He's got stuff on iTunes. If you just want some instrumental classical music to listen to in the background, it's just piano. Sometimes it has some strings. It's really good stuff. I like it.
Do you shoot for a specific time for each episode, or is it just work out that they seem to all be around the 25-minute mark? Roughly.
They do. I learned early on that I like pattern. I like rhythm. And if I set expectations for myself, then I can just aim for those expectations. So what I did the first few episodes was take a lot of the stuff that I'd already written for that PDF giveaway and recorded that. But I started to write new items as well. And I knew I needed it to be kind of structured. And over the course of 3 or 4 episodes, just kind of worked out the kinks. And so at this point, I don't necessarily write for time. I write for page numbers. I have the same document that I always open up for every episode. I just copy it and use it again. Same font size and all that kind of stuff. And I just know that every section's about 2.5 pages long. I'm going to do, X number of sections with an intro and an outro. And I'm a creature of habit. I like to follow and run with that flow. But I also know sometimes there's just a story that needs an extra section, or the page numbers just need to be a little bit longer. So I just finished writing one today where 2 of the 3 sections are 3 pages instead of 2 pages, just because the story needed it. It needed to breathe a little bit more. For the most part, I try to stick to a rhythm.
You are someone that does it all yourself.
I am, yes. Well, I'll caveat that by saying in the last 3 weeks or so, I've started working with a research assistant. But yeah, up until then, all me.
But you're doing the editing, the recording, and on that side of it?
Yeah, I have trust issues. do you know what I mean? Like knowing when to slice something, where to slice it, how much pause between 2 sentences to drop in. I don't know. I don't know that I can trust anybody else with it.
My wife heard people talking at Podcast Movement about them having editors. And my wife said, why didn't you hire an editor? And I'm like, I can't do it. I couldn't do it. Yeah, so I had that. I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it sound a little elitist, but I look at the way that we edit as kind of like how you hold a paintbrush and the type of stroke you make with it. And I'm not the best artist, but I am an artist, and I have a style and I have an approach. And if I hired it out, it wouldn't sound like my editing, and it would probably sound better, but I don't want to take that risk. So there's just a list of things that I can't give out to anybody else. I can't have anybody else write the episodes because that's part of the character of the show. And I can't give out the voice part because that's my voice. And then the editing. At the end of the day, where I could find some help was to hire a research assistant, and so I give her a topic, some general guidelines. Here's what I think the conclusion's going to be. Here's what I think the theme will be. And I just let her go loose with it. And it's been really helpful. Because now I can sit down instead of sitting down on a Monday and saying, all right, I've got a new topic and I'm going to spend 8 hours now digging through articles and books and magazines and finding stuff. I just sit down with a Word file that she's done all that work for me, organized it, she's outlined it, it's got source material linked out. I can go read stuff if I need to. It's been really good.
What is your setup today? You mentioned earlier you started with the Blue Yeti. Are you still using the Blue Yeti, and what are you using hardware, software-wise to do your episodes?
I shifted around episode 7 to a new mic, and then I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how exactly to use that mic. So I record on a Shure SM7B, and then I have that cable run into a cloud lifter because it really wants a lot of gain. And then from the cloud lifter, it goes into one of those red Focusrite Scarlett mixers. I can't remember what call number it is. It's like 2i1 or 1i2 or something. And then that USB's out to my Mac. For hardware-wise, it's pretty simple. I record because my office is echoey. We talked about that already. I no longer record in front of a glass screen computer. I record in what's essentially a homemade shower stall. And I took PVC piping and I made a 3-sided booth. And then I've hung moving blankets on the walls and then acoustic panels on top of that. And the mic kind of slides in through the corner on a boom. And that's really helped.
And software-wise, what are you using to edit?
Always has been GarageBand. Nothing fancy. But then again, my needs don't really require more. Right. I know folks with shows that required like a dozen different voice tracks, interview shows, multiple guest shows, that kind of thing, plus the audio elements. I'm really thankful each and every day that I don't run one of those shows because this is really simple.
How long does it take you to do an episode? Is it the full 2 weeks between episodes?
I don't know an answer right now because I have a research assistant, but it was generally 30 to 35 hours between research, then writing, recording, and then production. That would be one of my 2-week cycles. But the rest of it is, admin, bookkeeping. I get a lot of listener email, hundreds a month, and I try to respond to all of those. I have a literary agent, and I have the TV stuff going on, and I take a lot of meetings, and I've created something that's kind of eating at my time. So thankfully it's a full-time job. It pays for itself. And those 30 hours I get to do that. It's my job. It's pretty nice.
You transition us right there into what can you say about your TV deal?
Nothing.
I mean, can you say, are you allowed to say when it'll be live, if it'll be live?
I can guess. My guess is late next year, but the whole team, including the network, who I can't name just yet. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of like legal duct tape over your mouth when you do stuff like this. I really wish I could talk all about it, but they're more interested in doing it right than rushing it out the door, which is a really big relief to me. So that just means that people have to wait. It's going to be worth the wait. The people that we're putting together on this, it's fantastic. Yeah.
And from what the press releases that are out there, you're with Gale and Hurd and Ben Silverman. So kind of nice A-team there.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Silverman used to run NBC, and Gale and Hurd is she's a Hollywood legend, probably one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, not just because her team makes The Walking Dead, but
she's famous. If people don't know who she is, just go and look her up. She's got a Wikipedia.
Oh yeah, go to Wikipedia.
She's
Gale.
Yeah.
Gale is spelled Gale, and Hurd is Hurd. She's fantastic. I mean, I've been in her office so many times, and I was sitting down to work one day at her coffee table, and there's a statue from the Abyss right in front of me, and there's a zombie head, by my elbow, and all these different awards. She's just so talented. So,
can you say how you got to their attention?
Yeah, I mean, I lived the proverbial dream come true. I launched Lore in March of last year. By August, so month number 5, I was earning a full-time income from the show. Quit my job, went full-time doing the show. About a month after that, I started getting approached by a lot of TV production companies, a lot of them, probably 24 total across the span. Once the announcement went live in April, people stopped emailing me, but there were months there where I was just constantly getting offers. And a lot of it was small shops, people with no experience with a big name project or no inroads with networks, small companies that thought that Lore would be their way to get big. And that's awesome. I think that was a smart request for a lot of them. But I wanted somebody that had a track record and was good at what they did. And all of a sudden I got reached out to by a company called Propagate. And Propagate Content, they're kind of, I don't want to say an offshoot of A&E Networks, but kind of like funded and launched in part by A&E Networks to just go create lots of content, like go find new talent. And they reached out to me. They said, hey, we love your show. Their vision lined up with mine, and they had a lot of connection with the television industry. And then after that, we started looking for a creative partner. We needed somebody who could really excel at telling stories visually in a creative way. And we met with a lot of fantastic companies. And then eventually it was Gale and Hurd's crew that just won us over. So yeah, they make the show called The Walking Dead. It's kind of small. Some people might have heard of it. And then we did our network pitches, and now we're in I don't know what phase it's called. We're just like building the thing to move forward. So it's been really fun.
Congratulations.
Hey, thank you. I mean, again, this was all an accident. I work hard, and it's kind of an intersection of a lot of skills that I picked up over the years, and somehow it's all working out. Hopefully it's the start of something big. And I tell people, even if the TV show somehow flops, it's good for podcasting, right? It's good that people hear when they watch an episode of a show on TV, they see, from a podcast, like based on the podcast by some guy named Aaron. And people will say, what's a podcast, right? And then they'll start looking into what podcasts are. I see it as a win-win for everybody. It's going to be good for the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was great. We mentioned it on the feed once it was announced, and so I'm happy now to have you on here to talk about it. One of the things you mentioned early on the episodes is that you have your own books, and I want to know how podcasting has affected your book sales. What were your book sales the 18 months prior to podcasting, and now roughly 17 months since you've launched? You don't have to give numbers, just a ratio.
I know. I made about $5 a month publishing my own books before Lore went live, and was slow at first because everybody's show grows over time. So my show was small at some point. At this point, I would say 99 out of 100 book sales have happened since the show was launched, probably even more. It's almost as if I wasn't selling books before, but now I am. I couldn't live off it. It's not a full-time salary, but it's like the talk I gave at Podcast Movement. It's one of multiple streams, and that's what I think a lot of hosts should aim for. Make a little bit on stream number 1, make a little bit on stream number 2, and you add a bunch of them together and you've got an income.
Well, congratulations on that as well.
It's been fun, and like there's a lot of pressure there because people will say, hey, I love your show. I'm going to pick up your books because if they're as good as your podcast, then I'm going to love them. And I keep thinking, well, they're very different. It's fiction. It's not me telling you a historical story. But people seem to like them a lot. So that's been working out well.
Any books you want to pimp while you have a chance?
People can swing by the Lore shop, allurepodcast.com/shop. I've got 3 paperbacks there. I mean, I write basically I tell people the style of Stephen King. I like the supernatural thriller, people put into an unusual situation. I grew up cutting my teeth on the Monster of the Week episodes of the X-Files.
So did you watch Stranger Things then?
So I'm 3 episodes in.
So I'm 4 episodes in. So we're right at the same spot. So roughly.
Yeah. It's just a matter of time. I just don't have a lot of time to sit down and watch stuff. But every moment I get, I'm jumping over to my TV and watching another episode. So I'm just soaking it in. It's so good. It's so perfect.
So I'm listening to Lore and watching Stranger Things. Yeah, I'm kind of melancholy right now.
So you need to go download some of Chad's piano music and just like sit.
My wife actually said to me the other day, she said, you seem a little dour. And I was like, I gotta listen to something uplifting here after.
Yeah.
But no, I really enjoyed your show. It's been a lot of fun. Well, I won't say a lot of fun, but it's been very entertaining.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
What do you do on the promotion side to promote your podcast? Do you have any marketing efforts? Is there anything you've done?
Nothing, honestly. I mean, we've talked about, iTunes occasionally highlighting something. They've reached out to me a couple of times since what was that bump, like April or so? I've done a couple of banners since then, and that's always iTunes will reach out to you and say, hey, we want to promote your show. Can you make us a banner? Here are the guidelines, and then you make the art for them. Those are probably the biggest pieces of promotion. The show being talked about in a Hollywood Reporter announcement about a TV show is pretty good. But outside of that, it's just been word of mouth.
And the 35 hours a week that you put into the show.
Well, yeah. That's 35 hours a week is me making the show. I'm making it talkable, right? I'm making it worth talking about. People ask me all the time. They say, Aaron, how can I grow my podcast? And the answer that I always give them, and I always tell them ahead of time, look, this is going to be hard to swallow, and it's going to make me sound like a snob or a jerk or something. But it's a really simple answer. If your show is good enough, people will talk about it with others. And if they aren't talking about it with others, it's not good enough. People like to share the things that they enjoy. I mean, I'm no pro. I fell into this. And even a year and a half after I started, I'm still making things up as I go along. So I don't have all the answers. But, show promotion, it really does come down to word of mouth. If you build a show that people just can't help but talk about, they're going to tell their friends and their spouses and their children or whatever. It's going to spread. And that's what's been happening with my show. People have been talking about it.
I've heard you mention a few times on the show that you do live shows, and they've been well attended. Explain a little bit, what is the live show? What do people hear when they come to your live show? And then do you have any live shows coming up?
So a live show for me is sitting down at a table in front of a crowd of people with my microphone and my iPad. The iPad has a soundboard app on it, which has all the music that I'll use for the evening. And then I typically do 3 episodes, a little bit of conversation, do an episode, talk a little bit about it, set up the next one, repeat that, so I do 3 episodes. It's been a really great experience. It's been neat to just meet listeners. Podcasting is such an isolating hobby, right? For the podcaster and for the listener, because we do it all by ourselves. So being able to go out after a live show and do, because I have books and T-shirts, I can set up a merchandise table and I can do signings and chat with people and shake hands and meet my listeners. It's been really neat. It turns it into a community thing instead of something you do in the closet. And I tell a lot of podcasters, just go out and do a live show. If you can only pull in 10 people, that's 10 people that are going to come and hear you, and they can talk to you about what you're doing.
Do you charge for the live shows, or are they free to come? Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of times that's because the venue is going to charge. So, you got to cover the venue, and there's travel, and, selling merchandise helps as well. But yeah, and it's a growing trend. You see shows like Criminal doing a small tour.
Well, welcome to the NightVale. I know they do some really big shows.
Yeah, and there's a lesson in monetization too, because I don't believe that they do sponsors. They just do live shows and merchandise, and that's how they have their audience is of a particular type that's perfect for them, and that's how they support their show. So they tour a lot, and then Snap Judgement. I mean, they're just so great. Glenn Washington is a master with standing up and doing storytelling and bringing in people who can do the same thing. So I think live shows are a really good experience. As far as upcoming ones for me, I don't know why, but October seems to be the month that people ask me.
Gee, you can't imagine why.
Well, but they're never Halloween related. They're, come to this thing, but it's not Halloween related. I'm speaking twice at the Boston Book Festival in the middle of October, October 15th. Obviously, that's in Boston. The first time I'm talking is one of the author sessions. I'm going to talk about writing for audio, how I make lore, what the experience is like. And then that night, I'm going to do a live show at a nightclub nearby called the Storyville nightclub. Beautiful inside. Probably max out at about 250 people. I don't think we can fit more in the room. And then 2 weeks later, there's I don't know how you've described it, but Now Hear This festival, kind of like a Lollapalooza of podcast festivals, right? Like a couple dozen podcast shows showing up to do live versions of their shows. I'm there, The Moth, Mark Maron, Hello from the Magic Tavern. There's a lot of great shows showing up to do live stuff. So that's, I think, the 28th, 29th, and 30th of October. And I am on Saturday night, so the 29th.
Any memorable feedback that you've gotten from listeners over the last year and a half that, really sticks out, touched you, moved you?
I get a lot of email. The fact that I get email is memorable. Like, it's pretty humbling. People take time out of their day to email you and say, hey, I like what you do, or I hate what you do, because you get those too. I literally get hundreds a month, and it's always so encouraging to hear people say how much they love your show. They connect with it on some level. I released an episode this morning that is about the events that took place in a town called Paisley in Scotland. And within 2 hours had an email from a woman who grew up in Paisley, moved to the States when she was like a teen, and just wanted to thank me for representing her town well. And I get emails like that a lot. People who have some sort of a connection to the place or the people or whatnot. And it's really neat. I mean, I got an email the other day. If you remember episode 3 with the werewolf, his name was Peter Strumpf. And I had an email over the weekend from one of his descendants who now lives in Seattle, and saying that she grew up with these stories of people saying there was a werewolf in the family, and nobody really understood what they were talking about. And then they did some family tree research and tracked it back to this guy. And then all of a sudden, I'm talking about it on a podcast she likes. It's neat to see those connections. There is one that has stood out with me for a while. A few months back, I had an email come in from a mother of a young daughter, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She said her daughter struggles with anxiety disorder, and for some reason, she's letting her daughter listen to lore. And
Is that baptism by fire? Okay, you're afraid to swim, I'm going to throw you in the water.
Right, exactly. Let's make you worry about everything, and then ipso facto, you don't worry about anything. The mother said that it's made a huge difference in her daughter. And maybe that's just a testimony of the power of story, and just taking the time out to listen to something for 20 or 30 minutes in that focused moment. But she said it's been really helpful. And it's neat to hear that what I'm doing is in some way helpful to people.
I'll leave this last question here. Other than the word of mouth, is there, do you have any other advice for podcasters? Someone that's looking to start a podcast today?
I'm an opinionated, nice guy. I don't want to hurt people's feelings, but I really do believe in a lot of the things that I say about podcasting. What I tell people generally is don't start a podcast because you want to have a podcast. Because you're right. We're kind of in the third spike. It's the popular thing. People are very drawn to the idea of having a show. Don't start a podcast if all you want is to have a podcast. That's a bad reason to start one. It creates filler in the iTunes store. Don't do that. Start with a project idea. Think about it, mull it over, work it out, get really deep into it, and get a feel for what it could be. Plan it out, right? And then you ask yourself, what's the right format for this project? Maybe it's audio, sure, but maybe it's a video series on YouTube, or it's a new blog, or something you package up and sell as an ebook, But if it's audio, if audio is the perfect format for it, then do it. And my first rule for podcasters is plan ahead. Plan the story, plan the interview, plan the structure, plan the flow, the sound design, all of it. You plan it all out. Don't wing it. Have a design, have a goal, and fit the show to that. Don't wing it. I feel like when people wing it, they waste time, because then it's just filler space. And then second, just be professional. Pick a schedule and stick to it. Don't release an episode every 2 weeks for a month, and then go 3 weeks and then a week. And then the next day, put out another one. Don't be erratic. Just pick a schedule and stick to it. TV's taught us to kind of depend on our content popping up when we expect it to pop up.
And I think you've done very well with the bi-weekly schedule.
I toyed with weekly.
Well, I think you did it like around one. I know 1 year you did it last year you did it around Halloween.
Yeah.
And
It about
understandable.
killed me. Yeah, it about killed me because the way it worked out on my biweekly schedule is that I actually had to write 3 extra episodes, not 2. So I got to the end of October and I realized, oh crap, I have to write another one, and then I'm back on my rhythm. And I had 3 live shows that month, and I was doing some travel for the TV stuff early on, and it was just that month killed me. So I won't do weekly anymore. Plus, I knew as you know, by month 6 I was having TV conversations. I thought, you know, that's going to make my schedule pretty busy. If I go weekly now, I'll have to step back to biweekly. So I just stayed with biweekly. So that's what I tell people: be professional and pick a schedule, right? Just stick to it. It's about expectations. You teach your listeners what they can expect from your show, and then just deliver on those expectations time after time after time. And they won't unsubscribe unless you somehow change those expectations.
Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. And before you go, just remind people where they can go and find your show.
Oh, very easy. Lore Podcast, LORE podcast.com. The show's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @Lore Podcast as well. Follow along wherever you feel comfortable. Say hi, drop an email, and certainly check out the show.
And I say this, I love your artwork. I always show people when they say, what's good artwork look like? Yours is one of those that I send them. I go, this is simple, nice, clean. Look at this.
Yeah, and scalable, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, people are going to look, like we've talked about the iPhone app that Apple puts on the podcast app. What do you think those are? 1/2 by 1/2 thumbnails, if that? Art's going to get scaled down pretty tiny. So you do have to be simple. You can't go for high detail. Go with high contrasting colors. Like for me, it's very, very light gray and very dark gray. That helps it stand out. I'll just blame the fact that I worked for a designer as a decade on how it turned out. Also, that I did it in about a day. So it had to be simple.
Thank you again for coming on the show, and I look forward to when your TV series goes live.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
Again, thanks to Aaron for coming on the show and talking about his podcast, Lore, which you can find at lorepodcast.com or by searching in iTunes for Lore. I will, of course, have links in the show notes for episode 233 over at podcast411.com. On the podcasting news front, Blab Is Dead, and I'll have a link to an article over at Medium where the owners of Blab talk about why they killed it and where they're going next. But long of the short, if you were using Blab, now you need to use something else. Seems like Whoza.io seems to be one of the ones that people are going to. Elsie and I get into much more detail on this in the latest episode of The Feed. Go to thefeed.libsyn.com to learn more about that. We also talk about the whole issue of Omni Studios making some claims about being able to get podcast play data back from episodes that are downloaded, which they are not, and it was misrepresented. And we get really into deep on that in the latest episode, and also talk a little bit about the whole issue of RSS feeds, why they're important, and why a certain company out there is trying to kill them off, and it's not going to work. Again, it's all about the end user and this other company out there, Art19, and a few others. They are designing systems for podcast advertiser. They're not thinking at all about the podcast consumer. I think at the end of the day, these solutions aren't going to work. If you want to learn more about that, go over and listen to the latest episode of The Feed. I will also put a link to the latest episode of The Feed in the show notes for episode 233 over at podcast411.com. If you go to podcast411.com and click on the speaking link, you will see all the future events, plus links to many past events I've spoken at. September 23rd to the 25th, I will be at the LA Podfest in Los Angeles, California, and I'm going to be on a panel with Matt Belknap from Art19, so we should have a pretty heated debate about whether the RSS feed or private APIs is going to win the day. So if you're in LA, you want to be at that panel session, and that's actually going to be on the 24th, I believe, Saturday at 4 p.m. And then in mid-October, October 13th and 15th, I'll be speaking at the Society of Adventists Communicators Conference in Denver. In November, I'll be speaking at the DC Podfest Conference. So yes, going back to DC. And that's going to be my myth-busting session. And I'm going to have one of those myths being that APIs are the future. And then on February 1st, I'll be going to San Diego, and I'm going to be doing a 3-hour clinic covering Podcasting 101, 201, 301 at the Training 2017 National Convention. In 3 hours, I will take you from zero to podcasting with lots of great advice to get you going the right way. Of course, if you're going to any of these events, please come by and say hi or email me ahead of time letting me know you'll be there. And if you have an event you need someone to talk about podcasting, just let me know. Folks, make sure you are also subscribed to the feed. Go to thefeed.libsyn.com to get that show. Elsie and I will cover all the podcasting news to answering listener questions, and we go over stats and lots of real stats. As always, if you have any feedback, give us a call, 206-666-4357. That's 206-MOM-HELP, or send an email to podcast411@gmail.com. Until the next time, I'm your host, Rob, from Podcast 411, reminding you to listen different. This podcast is proudly hosted on Libsyn.com. If you would like to learn more about podcast hosting, go to Libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com, as in Liberated Syndication. Find out more about podcast hosting, podcast monetization, podcast promotion through smartphone apps, as in iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, plus many other features, including on Publish to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, WordPress, Google Play, Spotify, and now iHeartRadio, and also auto conversion to video and posting to YouTube for your audio shows. Plus our new destination stats. Again, go to Libsyn.com, and if you use promo code podcast411, you get the rest of this month free and all of next month free.